Hello, good morning. This is Rick Pina, and I'm bringing you today's word for November 19, 2015. Yesterday, I shared my heart with you, and I trust that you could sense my heart coming through in the delivery. It was a powerful message. I was meditating it, and actually I've been meditating it since yesterday. And so today we're going to continue to flow in the same vein. We've been dealing with a passage in Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 to 23 for a few days now. And I trust that you've been learning and developing and growing, and God has been speaking to you from this passage. So I want to go back to this passage today. This message is part of a series entitled Grace-Based Success, where we have been learning how to win in life, how to do it God's way by his unearned and amazing grace. And the title of today's message comes in the form of a question. And the question is, what are your priorities? What are your priorities? So let's go back to the passage and let's get to it. So after Peter spoke out against what Jesus said, Jesus, shared in an intimate setting with the disciples that he was going to have to die. He revealed the Father's will that he was going to have to die, but he was like, don't worry about it, because after 3 days, I'm going to be raised from the dead. And then Peter, speaking out of sheer emotion, I guess, he says, listen, Lord, that's not going to happen. I don't want that to happen to you. And so Jesus looks at Peter, and this is what he said: get away from me, Satan. You are not helping me. You don't care about the same things God does. You only care about the things that people down here think are important. Think about that for a minute. Jesus was focused on the priorities of the Father, and he was only doing the Father's will. And then Peter spoke out against it because really he was speaking out of his humanity. And really, I believe that Peter only said what he said because he loved Jesus. Honestly, I was like, who would want, Jesus? If you were walking with Jesus, you probably would have said the same thing. I probably would too. Who would want Jesus to leave? Who would want Jesus to die? No, Jesus, you're not going to die. No, Jesus, I don't want you to die. But listen, Jesus was not living based on feelings. He was not living based on selfishness. He was living based on selflessness. Jesus was completely focused on the will of the Father, even if it cost him his life. Jesus was so committed to the Father and the Father's purposes that he was prepared to die in pursuit of purpose. So when Peter, a man who had just tapped into revelation from heaven, a man who had just spoken God's words, who had become the mouthpiece of God, who was commended for it, he was delivered from Simon the fisherman into Peter the apostle. This same man that had just heard from heaven dropped down to living by a lesser reality, just being basically speaking from his humanity instead of divinity, and then he got rebuked for it. So what does this mean to you today as it relates to priorities? I have 5 things to share with you. So let's get into them. Number 1, Jesus lived his life with a selfless dedication to the will of the Father, which is the ultimate example of how we are supposed to live. We are supposed to be selfless. We are supposed to live our lives with a selfless dedication to the will of God, the plans he made for us from the foundations of the world. Number 2, Jesus was misunderstood because he did not live like most people, right? Jesus was not pursuing his own thing. He was not pursuing selfish desires. He refused to allow himself to be manipulated by human agendas, whether it be his own agendas or anyone else's. He refused to allow himself to be manipulated, and he was led of God's Spirit in everything that he did. And this is once again an example of how we're supposed to live. He wasn't living like the world. He was in the world, but not of the world. He didn't act like everyone else. He was different because he was being led from above and not from beneath. He was living by faith and not by feelings. He was being led of the Spirit. He was operating off of a different agenda, and that made him stand out. My question is, what are your priorities, and how do you stand out? Are you living just like everyone else? Are you pursuing the same things that they're pursuing, or are you pursuing God's will for your life, which will make you stand out? Pursuing the will of God will put a spotlight on you for God's glory. And watch this, it may attract some things that will be painful, but that's okay, because even then God has given you the grace for it. Number 3, the plans you made for your life. Come on. We all make plans, right? We love to plan out our lives. So I'm sure you made plans. The plans you made for your life would have been okay. Had God not already made plans for you from the foundations of the world? So now there are two sets of plans. There are God's plans that he made for you before your mother met your father. And then there are your plans that you just made, whether it be for 2015 or 16 or your 5-year plan, your 10-year plan, whatever. So you got your plans and then you got God's plans. And if both sets of plans line up, then you're good. You're good to go. Pursue. But if both sets of plans don't line up, then one side has to change. And let me help you out. God is not going to change. See, that living by faith, it requires submission. It requires surrender. It requires dying to self. It requires submitting your plans to God's plans for your life so that his priorities can become your priorities. Number 4, be careful not to allow feelings to stifle your faith. Jesus was living by faith. Focus on what the Father said, even if he didn't feel like going to the cross. Remember the Garden of Gethsemane? And so he was not living by feelings, he was living by faith, even when it meant that he was going to have to die. Jesus was prepared to die because he was pursuing purpose. Now, Peter was not moved like that. Peter was moved by feelings, and Peter did not want to see his master put to death. So Peter spoke out of feelings, and Jesus made it clear that he was not being motivated by God. He was operating just like the world. And matter of fact, Jesus looked at Peter and spoke to Satan. Jesus looked at Peter and rebuked Satan because Peter allowed his emotions to get the best of him. Listen, as a believer, you're born again. Yes, you have feelings. Thank God for your feelings. But you cannot live your life based on feelings, and you cannot live your life based on selfish desires. You have to die to self, pick up your cross daily, follow him so that you can live your life based on his priorities for you. Number 5, and finally, what are your priorities? I mean, what is important to you? Jesus lived his life for one purpose and one purpose only, to do the will of the Father. Is that how you're living? If not, it's time to make some changes. Peter made the mistake of speaking out against the Father's will just because it was going to be painful. But guess what? The will of God is not always pleasant. God never promised you a perpetual picnic. To accomplish the will of God is not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be pleasant. Sometimes the will of God will take you through the fire. Sometimes the will of God would mean that all hell breaks loose in your life, accomplishing the will of God. Sometimes you're right smack dab in the center of God's will, and you're in the middle of a storm. The storm will come. The enemy will come. You know why? Because the will of God, the purpose of God on your life will sometimes attract opposition. And then you're in the position where you're asking God for less challenge. And what God often does when you ask God for less challenge, he responds with more grace. He says, no, I'm not going to take the challenge away, but what I will do is give you the grace to overcome it. So he will say something like he told Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. So you must be willing to accept the assignment, even if it means that it's going to be painful, even if it means it's going to be challenging, even if it means you're going to go through some things, because you also know that you have already embraced the grace for it. So he gives you the grace to accomplish everything that he called you to do. Now, if you reject the will of God just because it's difficult or just because it's painful, just because you don't want to go through it, then you are not ready to experience God's best. You want to experience God's best, you say. You want to experience God's best, and you got to be willing to do what he tells you to do, even when it costs you something, even when it costs you everything. Whatever it costs you is going to pale in comparison with the glory which shall be revealed through your life. So when God's priorities become your priorities, then you are ready to do whatever he leads you to do, even when it costs you dearly, because you live your life with a mindset knowing that whatever I suffer now, like Paul said, I reckon that the sufferings of this present world are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. There is a glory. There is an eternal weight of glory being worked in my life when I go through whatever I go through, when I endure whatever I endure, when I pursue whatever I pursue, because I'm doing this thing for God. And whatever I encounter on the path to my purpose is something that I'm already equipped and enabled and empowered to overcome. And I will do it for God's glory by God's grace. So let's close this out with a declaration of faith. Repeat after me in faith from a believing heart. Say, Father, I thank you for teaching me about your grace and also my requirement to live by faith. I am on this planet because you sent me here. I was born for your divine purpose, and I live my life in tireless pursuit of purpose. I live my life by faith, focused on your will and nothing else. I died to self and selfishness, I don't allow the pursuit of selfish desires to derail me from the pursuit of purpose. To that end, I declare that I'm not moved by feelings. I am moved by faith. By faith, I do whatever you lead me to do, even when it is painful and challenging. I often ask for less challenge, and you often respond with more grace. So I embrace your grace to endure and overcome every obstacle, every challenge, and every fight on the path to my purpose. I have no other desire in life than to do what you sent me here to do. I will accomplish my divine assignment, not because I'm so good, but only because you're so good, Father. Only because of your grace. I declare this by faith in Jesus' name. Amen. This is today's word. Apply it and prosper. If you're not getting these messages, go to todaysword.org, sign up, get the messages. That will be a blessing to you. As you head into this day, just remember, when you make God's priorities your priorities, you get to experience his best, even if it means going through challenges. His grace is on you to overcome it, to overcome everything you face. And in the end, it will work for you in an eternal weight of glory. God bless you.